then you really get down to what we teach and how do you discover your gifts. Because that really says where you'd spend your time. Were you effective, which is John 15:8, where bearing fruit. Then where do people confirm you? I mean, like tonight, Mary, your confirmation was right here as I talk about how you spend your time.
Hey y'all, welcome to the My Place podcast. I'm your host, Mary McSwain. I'm joined as I normally am by my dad, Jay McSwain. And if y'all tuned in to last week's episode, we talked a lot about time. If you missed that episode, I would highly encourage you go back and listen to it because it really teed up our conversation for today. We're talking again about how we're spending our time.
By the way, I wanted to just tell you, it's a really cool shirt that you have on today.
Thank you. California, West Coast.
Yeah, that's a really cool looking shirt.
You used to live out there, didn't you?
Yes, I did. In the Bay Area too. I could see the Golden Gate Bridge from where your mom and I live. But talking about time, that was way before your time and before you were even a thought in your mom and I's minds. But yeah, that's a cool looking shirt that you have on.
You know, I've heard a lot of stories about y'all's time in San Francisco. Do you remember when we were in Chicago a couple weeks ago and we were talking about the weather and we both said, it's so cool out here. Mom would love this weather. And she always says whenever it's between 50 and 60 degrees, wow, it feels like San Francisco out here.
Yeah. She says that all the time.
All the time. If the weather is anywhere from 50 to 60 degrees, it's cool, there's a little breeze, it'll always take her back to the time when y'all lived in San Francisco.
Yeah. Hey, speaking about time, we haven't brought this up in the last few episodes that we've done, but we've had a very momentous moment of time in the last few weeks. You want to share it before we get into our topic today?
We have. So your oldest daughter, my sister, who's 2 years older than me, just got engaged to Andrew. They've been dating for 5 years now.
5 years.
Almost
and
5 years.
They've known each other 10.
Yes. This is the coolest story. And I didn't even realize this was part of their story until maybe a year or two ago. But they met each other their freshman year of high school. And apparently Andrew wanted to ask Maggie to homecoming, and his mom got her this pink basketball because she played basketball at the time. And he found out that Maggie wasn't allowed to have a date to homecoming freshman year.
Those horrible parents.
And so he never got to ask her. And then 4 or 5 years later, he finally got to ask her on a date, and the rest is now history.
Yeah.
Because they're getting engaged. And it's funny, we were talking about spiritual gifts today and how we use our time. And I am not always great with using my time wisely when things need to be planned, things that people with the gift of administration are probably really on top of. Because with all the different places that we've been this month, I also am now a maid of honor, and I've heard that that comes with lots of roles and responsibilities, of which I have no idea what that entails, other than my first task was to help plan her an engagement dinner with a lot of her friends in Atlanta. And whether it be difference in our gifting or our personality or what it is, I was tasked with finding the restaurant and inviting everyone, making the reservation. And Maggie texted me yesterday, hey, how's it going with the dinner reservation? Which reminded me that I needed to make a reservation.
And it's probably 6 or 7 months out, right?
It's like 3 weeks.
Oh.
Yeah. And apparently in Atlanta, things book up pretty quickly. So you need more time to book those reservations. And again, whether it be her personality or her gifts, I was talking to her on the phone today, and I did email the restaurant that we were looking at going, but she said, Mary, just in case those restaurants don't work out, I booked us a reservation at this other place this morning. So speaking of time and spiritual gifts, I am learning to use my time more wisely in light of the areas in which I'm a little weaker when it comes to, again, my personality, my gifting. But that was a big moment in the last couple weeks. We've been traveling everywhere, but in the midst of all of those travels, we had a night with both of our families where we got to celebrate the time that they've spent together the last 5 years and the time that they're going to get to spend the rest of their lives together. So that was really fun.
Good. Well, let's dive into today's topic.
Today, we're still talking about time, but we're also talking about how that relates to spiritual gifts. But to give people a refresher on what we talked about last week, we talked about the significance of some numbers and how we use our time in relation to those numbers. So give us a recap. What did
Yeah.
we talk about last week?
So we brought up the numbers 8,760, 730, 168, and 24. And what I told you all last week is that 8,760 is the number of hours that you have in a year. The average number of hours in a given month is 730, and a week is 168, and then a day is 24. But here's what we talked a lot about last week, just more generically. This week, we're going to talk about time, God, and spiritual gifts. But time is the one commodity. You can't reproduce it. And we talked a lot last week about the scriptures speak about being intentional with our time. And so time does relate to spiritual gifts. And we've got some verses that are really, really big to us that when we talk a lot about spiritual gifts. So Mary, let's talk about those verses as it relates to spiritual gifts, and then we'll see if we can bring time into it.
If y'all have listened to any of our podcasts before, listened to any of our teaching on spiritual gifts, you might already be familiar with these verses that we're talking about. We constantly go back to them when we talk about spiritual gifts. The first one being 1 Corinthians 12:1. Now concerning spiritual gifts, brothers and sisters, I do not want you to be uninformed. Then you go to 1 Timothy 4:14. Do not neglect the gift that you have. 2 Timothy 1:6, for this reason I remind you to fan and to flame the gift of God which is in you. In 1 Corinthians 12, it says, don't be uninformed. Be informed about the gifts that you've been given. In 1 Timothy 4, do not neglect. In 2 Timothy, fan in to flame. So, Dad, these verses that we constantly go back to that tell us about our need to be informed about our gifts, but also how we should steward those. How does that relate to our conversation about time?
Well, if you don't know what your gifts are, you can't be intentional because you only have a limited amount of time. You can't leverage your spiritual gifts if you don't know what they are. You can't fan into flame. Again, I'll go back. You only got so much time you can fan. And if you are going to leverage your life for the most impact for God in His kingdom, that goes down to time. Where are you going to give your time? And when it says do not neglect, too many of us, we never think about our gifts and where our time is. I've had choices in my life, some that were really, really good choices, things that would have been great. Some that would have, like, some opportunities that would be like, wow, you got to do that. But when I thought about my gifts and how I want my gifts to be used, they didn't line up with that. So why am I going to give my time to somewhere that is not being able to leverage what my giftings are? So again, time, not neglecting. You only got so much time in a day, in a week, a month, and a year. Leveraging that time and steward it through your spiritual gifts. So I have a question for you. How do you think this might practically apply to how and to where you might spend your time? How would it practically apply to you, Mary?
I think you just gave an example of how that would apply to all of our lives, is that it informs you and helps you more effectively evaluate the opportunities that are presented to you. But if you don't know what you have to give, how do you use that knowledge to help evaluate the opportunities that you've been given? I think we've talked about this on a previous episode of the ways in which you even use your spiritual gifts in your role as the chaplain for the Atlanta Braves. And because you know what you have to give, you know, how am I leveraging my time there, which is a lot of time? How am I leveraging my gifts and my time to effectively serve in that role that I've been called to? And as you were talking about that process of evaluation and talking about how to practically apply not just the knowledge that we have, but how to practically use and wisely use the time that we have, you spoke towards how I evaluate an opportunity in light of how I'm gifted. And I think that is something that oftentimes sometimes people misevaluate or misunderstand because they evaluate an opportunity and they might not understand how they could use their spiritual gifts in that environment. They see a leadership opportunity, but they don't think they have the gift of leadership. So they feel as though they can't pursue something that might be an open door in their life, but they might not realize how in that opportunity am I going to use the gifts that the Lord has given me to fulfill that role. So I would love for you to speak to that for those people who hear you say evaluate opportunities so that you use your time wisely in light of how you're gifted. How would people evaluate those opportunities and how to use their time if the opportunity might not on paper align with the ways that they're gifted?
I want to back up and I want to give some practical examples because I think as I give some of my practical examples, it'll probably help those that listen and watch be able to translate it, provided you know what your spiritual gifts are. You got to know what your gifts are. That's the starting place. But I'll take before we started recording tonight. I was on the phone with a guy that had called and asked me, could I do something uh, that I can do for the Braves that makes people feel special when they go to the game? And that's get up on the screen. He had called me, but I was on the phone with our friend Stephen Bies, who's a pastor in North Carolina. And he said, hey, there's a dad and his son going to the game. And again, now I need to prep for those of you who don't know, my number one spiritual gift is hospitality, wanting people to feel welcome. So our friend, Pastor Stephen, asked, could I get somebody's going to the game Thursday? And I'm not going to be there Thursday because I'm in South Carolina, but I'm going to have him up on the screen. So that was before we started tonight. Yesterday, again, my number one gift is hospitality. Yesterday, with one of our players and his families, I spent 7 hours with them. We have a great place that our family has on the lake that has a lot of cool things to do. You live above a barn and there's horses below it, and we have boats and all kinds of things to do for their kids. And so I spent 7 hours with them. We have a pond that you can go fishing in. 7 hours. I was driving home last night and I'm getting texts from people at the game asking if I can do something for them. And I texted my guys at the Braves and it got done. I went back recently, and just in the last 2 years, again, hospitality, number one for me. In the last 2 years, I have taken, I think it was 544 pictures with people at the Braves, like in a lot of different scenarios that I've had. But that's the practical way. I have the gift of hospitality. And the cool thing I get to do was not just give people a cool environment, but the conversations that I get to have about the Lord and about my role there and the things that God allows me to do in that role as the chaplain with the Atlanta Braves. So that's how I spend a lot of my time finding ways to help people feel welcomed in the environments that God has given me influence in. At the church where I serve as a pastor, they call it pastor of discipleship, but I really think it's the pastor of first steps, is I get to help people get engaged and involved and feel welcomed and a part of our church. I spend a lot of time with hospitality. Now, I want to ask you, and if you don't know some of the answers to this, I can fill it in because I watch you. how do you spend a lot of your time? What do you do? First of all, what your gifts are, and how do you spend that time? And I'm going to tell something kind of funny that I don't know if you've noticed this, but I think it'll be a fun one for us tonight.
So interested to
Let
find out what I haven't
a little
noticed.
secret behind the scenes of even doing these together. So
Mhm.
go ahead.
So, for those of y'all who don't know, I don't know if I've shared this with y'all before. On my spiritual gift assessment, my top 3 spiritual gifts since I was 8, 9, 10, maybe as early as I could take it, have always been wisdom, knowledge, and teaching. Those are my top 3 spiritual gifts. Wisdom being the application of knowledge, wisdom being the application of truth, knowledge being the desire and gravitation towards acquiring the depth of truth, and teaching being the ability to articulate and communicate truth and difficult concepts in a way that is clear and concise for the audience to understand. So, a lot of the time that I spend here at Place and at my church is preparing for conversations like this, where I get to dive into truth. That's the gift of knowledge. Where I get to figure out the questions that might help people apply that truth, is the gift of wisdom. And then I get to help facilitate the communication of that and also share the wisdom and the knowledge that I get to acquire by using my time there. So these podcasts, I do one with you, I do one with the pastor at my church. And so a lot of my time is spent preparing for these and then getting to do them with you and with Pastor Bucky. A lot of my time often is preparing for speaking engagements, which I love doing, where I get to again dive into the truth of scripture. I get to go deep into the word of God. I get to learn how I can apply that to my life and to the lives of others, and then also figure out how to compose and package that in a way that is applicable for the audience, but also in a way that is easy for them to understand. So I get to package how am I going to paint that picture for them with my words. And that's a lot of what my job entails. And that's how I can see myself fanning into flame the gift of God that He has given me, not neglecting them, because I can see areas in my life where I've been given the opportunity to do that. And I've also said yes to those opportunities.
So, do you want to hear my?
I would love to. I'm curious.
So each week, we have our little studio here, and it's in our offices, but it's also the reception area where we have like chairs and little tables and everything. And so every week, your office is right behind you, and it's all glass back there. Every week when we do our podcast, and I say we, I, I set up the set. And I'm going back getting all the cameras and all the stuff. So when Seth or whoever, the guys that do our recordings, they come in here and they just get everything looking right. But I set it up. And I laugh sometimes because you're over there reading your Bible, taking notes, preparing for our time together, using your gifting. And tonight it was really funny because I came in, you were over there preparing, and I'd been on the phone in the car for 30 minutes with Pastor Stephen and then with my other friend that was asking me. I was using my gift of hospitality, even setting up in here to make those who watch our podcast feel welcome, hopefully in a cool environment, a welcoming environment. But you are over, and it's every week. It doesn't bother me at all, by the way, that goes on. But that's where I see so much of your time is spent studying. And as a matter of fact, I was telling a pastor today, she's a lot more articulate. I was promoting you for like a women's event. And I said, I don't do women's events, but I said, she's still a lot more articulate than I am, but you probably study a lot more preparing than I do. So it's just interesting, even in this space today, as we get ready for this every week. I'm sitting here trying to create the environment that people feel welcome watching this. You're over there using your gifting, preparing so that you can present truth in a real clear and concise way. Never thought about that, did you?
I haven't. I didn't know if you had thought about that either. I'm glad you have.
Yeah, and what is interesting, I've thought about it. I see it every week. I mean, when we do these. But as I was putting together some of our notes for speaking today, I realized What we do in preparing for this podcast before we hit play on the cameras, we're using our gifts. And it's kind of a cool thing. I'm using the gift of hospitality to create a welcoming environment. You're using the gifts of knowledge, wisdom, and teaching as you're back over there studying, getting ready to prepare. And by the way, if you guys watch our podcast regularly, we put together, I've learned all these fancy words. We do reels, right? And I always tell, let's do at least 3 or 4 of you and 1 of me, because I feel like you're a lot more articulate in what you say than I am. But it's using our gifts.
So, question for you then. How would you encourage people? We just gave examples in our own life, in our ministry, which is also our job, of how we know we are using our spiritual gifts in these environments that the Lord
Our
is.
time, we're using the time that we
Yes.
have and leveraging that time in our specific spiritual gifts. So this is about time and spiritual gifts, and we are leveraging the commodity of time through the gifts that God gave us.
How would you encourage people who have time that they have to give to certain things that may not be as seamlessly in line with their spiritual gifts? Maybe they know their spiritual gifts, but they don't know where in their life they can use them, or they don't know if they're using them, or how they could use them to leverage their time well. How would you encourage people to navigate that, and how they can use their spiritual gifts with the time that they've been given, because they have all been called to a specific place, but how can they figure out, how can I use the ways that the Lord has gifted me in the places he's already called me?
Wow, that takes us right back into a lot of the principles that we use in discovering your gifts. So, the first thing I'd say is it really does go back to having a framework of what the gifts are. And I'm not, you can take our assessment for free, so I'm not trying to sell anything, but it does start with having a framework of what the gifts are, to be informed. As First Corinthians says, do not be uninformed. Then you really get down to what we teach and how do you discover your gifts, because that really says where you'd spend your time. Were you effective, which is John 15:8, where bearing fruit? Then where do people confirm you? I mean, like tonight, Mary, your confirmation was right here as I talk about how you spend your time. My confirmation was how you acknowledge how I spend a lot of my time in the role that I fill with the Atlanta Braves. But other people will, for those of you, if you get involved in the lives of people, they'll start confirming you. Then what do you enjoy doing? I mean, Psalm 37:4, delight yourself in the Lord. He'll give you the desires of your heart. When what you enjoy doing, what spiritual gift lines up with it? Then where is it pure? You're not doing it because somebody made you feel guilty. You're doing it because you love God and you love the way God is using you. So much of what we talk about goes back to so many of the principles that our material that we've come up with talks about in the teaching. Because time in evaluating, again, where you're effective, where you're confirmed, what you enjoy, and where it's pure. That's what I would say to those of you that are watching is when you look at where you're going to spend your time. There are times where you have to fulfill roles that you don't have a gift for. But when you're going to intentionally, and that's the key word, when you're going to intentionally look for opportunities to give your time, give it in areas that you're gifted in, not in areas that you're not gifted in, but also allow God to use you in those roles when God puts people in your path or situations in your path that you might not be gifted for.
Speaking of time, I think the very first time, even in this conversation, when we read it, what I was thinking of In 2 Timothy 1:6, where it tells us to fan into flame. Fanning into flame and harnessing a flame requires time. It requires a spark, but then fanning a flame requires you to sit in front of that flame, in front of that fire, and fan it. And as you talk about, get involved, discover the things that you enjoy, expect confirmation. Confirmation requires you to actually do something. Getting involved requires your time. Figuring out what you enjoy and where your motives are pure require you giving time in order to discover what you enjoy, to discover where your motives are pure. And so that takes us all the way back to our conversation about time. Where are you intentionally spending your time? Are you giving your time back to the Lord? The verse that you always go back to that you wear on your wrist, Matthew 16:25, you find your life as you give it away. You're giving away your time, and you're giving away your time to the things of the Lord or to what you want to do with your own life. And as we talk about even fanning into flame takes time. Informing yourself of your spiritual gifts take time. Neglecting requires you to give time back because you find your life as you give it away. And so as you discover those gifts, it's going to require an intentional setting aside of your time. It's going to require intentional pursuit. And so, even as you're talking about the principles to discovering your gifts, all of those principles require a certain element of our time. And to pursue those things, it requires the intentionality of our time as well. So, it brings us all the way back to reflecting on, where do I give my time? What am I doing with my time now? And how could I manage my time and allocate my time in a way that would give me the time to fan into flame the gift of God that He's given me?
You know what is interesting? This is kind of crazy. I've never realized this until sitting here listening to you. So many, many years ago, I was in college, many, many years ago. And for 2 years, I was an intern at my home church in Vidalia. And all the time, we had an outdoor basketball court, and I would play in the morning at like 5:30 6 in the morning. I'd play in the middle of the afternoon, and kids would come up to the church because they knew Jay would always be up for a game of basketball. And then I'd play in the evenings. And students would come, kids from around the town would come because Jay was always on a basketball court. And you know what? I look at it now, I was making them feel welcome at our church. And I never even saw that. I was using that gift of hospitality on that basketball court because they'd see me out there playing and they'd stop, and then we'd have 10, 15 playing, waiting to get into the game. We'd play 5-on-5. But that's what I hope people that watch this will do. Again, where are you giving your time, in what gift? I'd never, until tonight, I had never looked at, and that was 45 years ago. I'd never looked at it. I was using the gift of hospitality way back before I even knew what spiritual gifts were. I was using that gift. And so I hope people will evaluate their time to figure out what they enjoy doing, what are they doing, and then knowing what their gifts are so that they can leverage that.
I think that's a beautiful recognition that you had, that you may not have been able to do if you didn't know what your spiritual gifts were. You may not have been able to make that connection. And that's what we hope for y'all, is that by being informed as to what your spiritual gifts are, you can have those recognitions of times in your life where you didn't even know that you were using the gifts that the Lord gave you to not only enjoy the life that He's given you, but also glorify Him, to make people feel welcome, to make people feel included, to be able to share with people, to be able to encourage people, to be able to show people mercy or to lead them or to watch over and shepherd them. So I would highly encourage y'all, if you don't know what your spiritual gifts are, be informed about them. We can link our app for the spiritual gifts app that we have in the description of this podcast so that you can go and be informed and discover what your spiritual gifts are. But it's not just about knowing what you have, it's knowing that you've been given that gift to give away for the glory of God and for the edification of his body and of his people. So fan that gift into flame. Do not neglect that gift by holding on to it. It's meant to be something you're given to give away, again, for the glory of God and for the edification and building up of the body. So as we close this conversation, highly encourage y'all to be informed as to what your spiritual gift is. Do not neglect the gift that you have, and make sure that you fan that into flame. So thank you again for joining us, and we hope to see you here next week.